It sucks though because now the hemp industry will have the same problems as the cannabis industry.
Look, I think you hit the nail on the head. And the broader point here is that there needs to be coherent regulations, right? Hemp and cannabis is a legal distinction. It's not a scientific distinction. The smart thing to do would be for Congress. And look, I know Congress is Congress. I'm sitting here telling the federal government what to do. Of course, they're not going to listen to me. But the smart thing to do would be to regulate THC as THC, right?
Welcome to the KayaCast, the podcast for cannabis businesses looking to launch, grow, and scale their operations.
Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here and get into the discussion.
So, cultivated news. When and why did you start that?
Yeah. So I'll make the sort of elevator pitch as pithy as possible. I've been a journalist on the cannabis beat for quite a long time. I worked at Business Insider and launched and led the cannabis vertical there way back in 2017, which makes me ancient in terms of cannabis years, I think. So I had a wonderful experience at BI, and I eventually made a decision in late 2022 that I wanted to expand out and capture some of the value for myself. And I turned 30 in the middle of the pandemic and was like, what's next? Kind of one of those moments. So I left BI and I went to business school to pursue an MBA. And so during business school, I just missed writing and reporting a little bit. It's hard to let go of that muscle to unclench it once you've been in a newsroom like Business Insider for so long. And so I had a bunch of story ideas. I started writing on a Substack. This was like early 2023. And the Substack got a lot more followers and interest. I thought it was going to be a fun side project, basically beer money while I was in grad school. It quickly snowballed past that. And so it started taking up like 30% of my time and 50% of my time. And then I was skipping class to work on it. In the late 2023, my now business partner, Jay Rosenthal, approached me and said, why don't we take what you have with your Substack and really build a full media platform, meaning a daily newsletter, daily live streams, and really build that muscle up. And it was credit to him for really seeing the vision of the business. And so we officially launched from my Substack in November of 2023, and we've been growing really well ever since. And I think that as from what we were discussing a little bit before we started, as some of the big incumbent cannabis media companies start to pull back a little bit, we see that as a big opportunity.
That is so cool to do something out of passion and seeing it grow and flourish.
Yeah, it's very cool from the outside, and I would say on the inside, I go up and down a lot, right? And I think not that Cultivated is the same scale as a lot of other businesses people have founded, but managing emotions is a really hard part of being a founder. Some days are really good. I'm writing really good stories. I'm getting great reader response and partnership money is flowing in. And some days it's all the opposite. There's a mistake in my story. People are yelling at me on the internet. A partner wants to pull back. And it's just making sure that you're taking those ebbs and flows, but it's a steady growth upward, I would say.
You definitely have to be even keel, right? Nothing is, if it doesn't kill you, it's fine, but
That's right.
you can't be over the moon with something forever.
That's exactly right. Like I think, Jay, my partner, he's older than I am and he manages that. He said, okay, just stay even. Don't get too excited. Don't get too low. Like we're in this for the long game. It's funny, like I'm a big basketball fan and Kawhi Leonard is the guy I try and emulate. He's very even keeled, never celebrates after a basket, always gets back on defense. So I try and bring that mindset in to the business for
You're
sure.
from Brooklyn. Why you follow Kawhi?
I'm originally from Toronto. I live in Brooklyn. And so
Okay.
that's where like that one season that Kawhi was on the Raptors was forever imprinted on me.
Yeah, 2019 was a fun year,
It
wasn't
was a
it?
great year. Yeah.
Oh, got it. So you moved to Brooklyn, I'm guessing for school. And how do you like
No,
it?
so I moved to Brooklyn. I've been in Brooklyn for 9 years. So I moved to work at Business Insider for my first job and I stayed. And so I'm a dual citizen now. So I am from Brooklyn, but my being born and raised in Toronto, my sports allegiances are still to my hometown.
Since we're talking about New York and you're right there, what's happening right now in that market?
Yeah, New York has been an interesting market to cover for many reasons. And I think it's important to give context for how New York developed its cannabis rules and regulations. The MRTA, the law that legalized cannabis in New York, was passed in 2021, right? It doesn't seem like that long ago, but we were really in a different world in 2021 than we are now. It was the middle of the pandemic. New York, especially, was still very much shuttered when this was going on. It was at the height of the George Floyd protests. And so social equity and sort of the broader DEI push was very top of mind, especially for cannabis legalization, which sort of intersects with those trends in various ways. The result of that, which I've covered a lot and we're still unwinding, is good intentions meeting economic reality. And it's interesting because New York right now, there's multiple dispensaries in my neighborhood. I live in Boerum Hill in Brooklyn. If you walk into any one of them at 6:15 p.m. on a Thursday, it's going to be packed, right? There's plenty of people in there. The brands are awesome. People love buying and consuming cannabis here. What that masks is that the regulations are very unfavorable to a lot of industry operators. They're taxed really heavily. It's really burdensome to comply with all the various rules and restrictions about where you can locate, how you can sell, who you can sell to, who gets a piece of the revenue. And what you have is an industry that is growing like gangbusters, but is not very profitable for many people in the space. And the reality is tough, right? There's a lot of awesome brands being created. Like I said, it's New York. There's a ton of energy. There's a ton of talent, but there's not a lot of people making a lot of money. And so it's a difficult market for operators. That being said, it is an interesting market to cover as a journalist. And not that I want to dance on graves or celebrate the downfall of anything, but it does keep it interesting. So I'll wrap this up with a little anecdote. One story about that front is New York set these rules where dispensaries could locate. They had to be a certain distance from schools, a certain distance from places of worship, churches, synagogues, whatever it may be. A couple months ago, they realized that all these dispensary locations were actually violating the rules and the law. And no one really noticed until people had opened their doors, had taken leases, had taken on debt to start their businesses. And so it's another thing. It's just like a wave crashing over the bow that you're always sitting here waiting to see what happens next. And that's really been the story of New York cannabis. But look, it keeps it an interesting market to cover. It's still exciting. I'm very bullish on the future of it, but there's been a lot of twists and turns to get this market open and online.
So where are we with that? I know that there was an injunction, and has anything moved over the last month?
Yes, so it has. There was an injunction. They can't enforce it. Per the last meeting, and there's another one coming out next week. So what I say now might be not true in a week. So I want to be careful. But per the last meeting, they're going to create rules to allow the stores that are in violation of those proximity restrictions to stay open while they iron out the rules. And so ultimately what's going to happen is this will go back to Albany, the legislature, and they'll have to figure out, like, are they going to grandfather them in? Are they going to rewrite the rules to allow them to stay? That's all unclear at the moment. But as of right now, they're allowed to continue operating. So it's not like you're going to have to close their doors tomorrow. I think the state understands how much risk went into opening these businesses and just how profitable locations are, right? Because it's New York City. There's not a lot of real estate, right? And there's not a lot of real estate that's far from schools. There's schools all over the place, right? And so these businesses have to be somewhere. And I think there is that understanding now. And by the way, the Office of Cannabis Management, the chief regulatory agency governing the industry in New York, has fully changed over, right? There's totally new people in there than there were in 2021. And they are unwinding all the confusion to the best of their ability right now.
When I heard, because I have friends in New York and we're talking, when I heard that they were initially saying, hey, we'll compensate you, you can apply for $250,000, and knowing how much some of these stores cost to open, that's not going to fly.
No. And they're in it for a lot more than $250,000. And so sure, it's a nice gesture, but it doesn't really paper over the losses that some of these stores were going to have to suffer for moving. That being said, even though they're allowed to continue operating, it's still a very difficult market to be in when the regulations are so uncertain. You're expecting something else to change. And there's, to use a terrible metaphor, like a sword of Damocles swinging over your head because you think, oh shit, sorry for swearing, but maybe I'm going to have to sell this real estate or get out of this lease and move in 365 days. That's a really hard way to run a business. And ultimately, yes, the entrepreneurs opening these businesses are going to suffer, but also their frontline employees, right? All the people they hire, they're going to have to pivot and change. And I think a lot of the operators here in New York really just want to have predictable regulations, right? To be assured that their business can continue to operate, because the last 4 years have been topsy-turvy.
Yeah, certainty is needed for sure. You can't operate and invest. I would imagine that, and we see it on our side too, because we service the industry. There's a lot of uncertainty on, are we out of pocket?
Right.
So what happens? And so the collateral damage is tremendous.
That's totally right. I think your point about collateral damage is really good. It ripples out, right? It's not just the dispensaries who suffer, it's all the service providers as well. Anyone who follows this industry closely knows accounts receivable is a very difficult issue, right? And when you throw more stones into the gears or wrench into the gears, whatever the phrase is, it gets harder and harder to operate. And all this breeds uncertainty, right? This is an industry that does need capital. It needs investors to want to be excited about and interested in it. And when they look at these headlines, they're probably like, I don't want to touch that until this is ironed out. And the result of that is going to be businesses will fail. And so that's the sad piece of this is that without certainty with the regulations, businesses will fail. And that affects everyone.
So where we are today is these stores are allowed to stay open. Are they allowed when their licenses expire? Can they renew until a final decision's had, or has that come out yet?
As far as I know, they will have to undertake a special process to renew their licenses until the decision's made. And so all the dispensaries that are in these restricted locations have a separate license renewal process that they can go through. I imagine that the hope is that they will iron out these rules before their licenses expire. You never know. I would guess, yeah, it is a guess. I'm guessing that they're going to figure this out before that happens. But if they don't, it's going to be a big problem.
Yeah, I don't envy operators. They go through so much, right? And at the end of the day, they're the front lines. They're where you get your product, and they're taking on a lot. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah. I think the last piece I'll say on that is to tie the whole story together, right? Like these operators are the ones that the original law was designed to help. Many of these are social equity operators. And so the intent of the law was designed to help these folks, right? Some of whom have convictions, cannabis related convictions, themselves, some of whom have family members convicted. And so when they're thrust into this almost debt trap by opening these stores, it's actually hurting them. And so I think that's the sort of broader injustice that we see here is that these really good intentions met with economic reality and met with the thicket of laws guiding New York City and Albany. And the result is that the people that the policies were designed to help are actually going to get hurt. And so that to me is where good reporting, like hopefully what we do, can help move the ball forward and create better policy for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Speaking about uncertainty, what is going on with hemp?
Yeah. So look, I think New York's MRTA law, this whole hemp issue is just a result of the haphazard policymaking on the federal government's part in terms of cannabis, right? There were so many opportunities in the last few years that Congress could have stepped in and created some sort of coherent regulation around hemp, around THC, around cannabis more broadly. And look, the politics are what they are, and they were unable to do. And so what happened last week, there was a ban. I think people are going to take issue with the word ban, but it effectively is a ban of most hemp-derived products and all hemp-derived THC products, right? That ban was snuck into the funding bill to reopen the government. And it was both a masterclass of politicking from Senator Mitch McConnell and also really symbolic of how broken America's cannabis policy is right now. Senator Rand Paul tried to, at the 11th hour, get it struck. He was unsuccessful. And so effectively, any hemp-derived THC product is going to be illegal by November 12th, 2026. So it's a little less than a year now. There's a few reasons why, in my view, I think this is bad. I know a lot of people in the industry might disagree with me. Number one is that the hemp-derived THC space, particularly with beverages, has been exploding. It's created a lot of consumer adoption. These products ended up in stores like Circle K, like Target, like Total Wine, this normalization wave they were at the tip of the spear of. And second, it was where all the investor energy was flowing, right? The only cannabis companies, maybe not only, but some of the few cannabis companies that have been successfully able to raise venture capital were these hemp-derived THC brands, right? So all of a sudden you have investors interested in the space. You have consumers seeing it normalized, sitting on store shelves alongside Miller Lite and whatever else you can get at Circle K. And then the rug has been pulled out, right? And so at the end of the day, the consumers in non-legal states aren't going to have access to cannabis, the cannabis products they love. Many businesses are going to have to lay off people. And they're also, not to mention, sitting on, in some cases, millions of dollars of inventory that is going to be illegal in less than 12 months. And so, again, like the operators in New York, that is a very difficult environment to start a business in, to create jobs in, and to bring all the economic benefits that cannabis can bring into various states. And I think, again, it's cannabis. What's true today may not be true tomorrow. I think a lot of lawmakers are trying to create carve outs for THC beverages and hemp derived THC products. We'll see what happens there. But it's certainly emblematic of very haphazard federal policymaking and the conflicts between state law and federal law in cannabis. It's just in the 7 years since the Farm Bill was passed that created this industry, nothing has gotten better. And in fact, it's gotten worse.
So you mentioned all hemp products are illegal too?
It's yes, with a caveat. So the intent of the language in the Senate bill says that any cannabis product containing more than zero point 0.4 milligrams of THC is illegal. Cannabis is a naturally occurring plant. Hemp and cannabis are the same plant scientifically. It's a legal distinction, just to make that clear. And THC occurs along with CBD and all the other desired cannabinoids in the plant at various quantities, meaning that to get under that THC threshold is going to make a lot of products illegal. And a lot of products that are marketed as CBD products do contain CBD in them, especially when they're full spectrum, right? Meaning they take the whole plant and create the product. And the language did not intend to ban CBD. The effect is that it's banning most CBD products from the market as well. And so, look, I always like to judge policy on the effect, not the intent, and that is the effect. The effect is a blanket ban on 99.9% of hemp products that you see out there.
Yeah, and you made a really good point. All of the cannabinoids are hemp derived.
Yes. Yeah, and they're all in the plants. That's how, I'm not a biologist, but I took AP Bio in high school. Like, that's how plants work, right? If you're going to take a plant and grind it up or convert it into oil and turn it into a consumer product, like those chemical compounds are going to be in there to ensure that they don't rise above that threshold, that being hot, like all of a sudden, like some shipments are going to just be illegal right off the bat if they're tested because it's 0.5% or it's 0.6% THC. And that's not going to get anyone intoxicated. You're not going to feel high from that. But if, by chance a regulator or the law decides to test it, then that company is screwed.
Because I know a lot of states are looking to implement legislation for either to approve hemp or ban hemp, particularly states with cannabis that are legalized. What's that now that federally hemp is effectively illegal? Have you heard anything from the state level?
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting what's happening. Just last night in Ohio, there was a big fight about in the state legislature. I think they were in session until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning battling over this. Mike DeWine, Ohio's Republican governor, has not been a friend to the cannabis industry, but to his credit, basically made a statement saying, Ohio voters voted for this. I'm going to do my best to implement the law in as safe a way as possible. To his credit, that was his standpoint. But him and Ohio Republicans have basically looked for any avenue possible to roll back legalization in the state, or at least tighten restrictions and tighten regulations around it. And so they're looking at this hemp ban and saying, let's harmonize Ohio's policy with federal policy. Makes sense on its face, sure, but at the same time, there's a lot of consumer demand for these products, and it's going to be interesting to see the result of that fight. I believe, and I have to double check because I haven't looked at the news today, but I believe that the hemp ban was ultimately struck from the bill in Ohio. I imagine that Kentucky, where Senator Rand Paul is from, who's been a friend of the hemp industry and where much of the hemp is grown, frankly, in the US right now, I imagine they will create some carve-outs. Those carve-outs might be age gating and pesticide testing and other sort of pretty common sense regulations that they may put on it. Texas is another interesting state. Texas Republicans tried very hard to ban hemp in the state. The governor ultimately looked at it as a futile effort. It failed in the House 3 times. And he said, look, if we're not going to ban it, let's create regulations around it. So I imagine that's what's going to happen in most states. The products are already there. States are already getting comfortable and getting used to being in direct violation of federal law on the cannabis issue. So why would that be different than hemp, I think is what a lot of policymakers are saying. And look, like they all want the tax revenue. They all want the job growth. They all want to be able to look at their constituents and say, look at your job. Do you like your job? Do you like the products? Do you like the shiny new road that we paid for out of this hemp revenue? And so ultimately, I think that's going to be the forcing factor. But we'll see. I think it anytime cannabis policy hits the federal sphere, it breaks containment, and parties on both sides want to use that as a springboard to getting their own version of policy passed. And we will see, but I imagine that most states will try at least to carve out what they see as the responsible actors versus the irresponsible actors. Maybe saying that low dose hemp derived THC beverages can stay on Circle K shelves, but Delta 8 synthetic products can't be sold in gas stations or something like that. I imagine that's where regulations are headed.
It sucks though, because now the hemp industry will have the same problems as the cannabis industry.
Look, I think you hit the nail on the head. And the broader point here is that there needs to be coherent regulations, right? Hemp and cannabis is a legal distinction. It's not a scientific distinction. The smart thing to do would be for Congress. And look, I know Congress is Congress. I'm sitting here telling the federal government what to do. Of course, they're not going to listen to me. But the smart thing to do would be to regulate THC as THC, right? And I'm not sure what that means. So they're going to have to debate that and negotiate over it. But it could mean let's let states set their own policies when it comes to THC. And some states will say, no, they'll be dry effectively. Some states will say we only want low dose beverages. And some states will go down the pathway of having regulated cannabis dispensaries like New York or California, Colorado, et cetera. And so I think that would be the smart thing to do. But right now, hemp has now been put, hemp derived THC has now been put back on the same playing field as cannabis. And I think there's a lot of people in the traditional cannabis industry, the state regulated cannabis industry, that wanted to see that. And I do see their point. Like, there is a level of fairness that they want in terms of taxation, compliance, and all those things. At the same time, it certainly is going to make investors shy away from the cannabis industry again. It's certainly not favorable for consumer adoption. And I just can't really sit here as a journalist who's covered the space for so long and see any sort of prohibition on THC being a good thing for the progress of cannabis legalization.
Yeah, speaking of states, I'm on Cultivated right now, and you guys have an article on the 26th ballot in Florida.
Yes. Florida has had again, I think this is a common theme of our discussion, a very haphazard progress towards cannabis legalization over the last few years. Amendment 3 was on the ballot last November in the presidential election. That would have legalized cannabis in the state. It actually received a majority approval by Floridians. I think the number came in around 56, almost 57%. But Florida has a 60% threshold for ballot measures to pass. And so ultimately it failed. The campaign behind Amendment 3, Smart and Safe Florida, has been funded by big cannabis companies like Trulieve and others. They're trying again, right? And they have now collected enough signatures to get the ballot to a Supreme Court and financial review, which is basically a key stepping stone to getting it back on the ballot in 26. But 26 isn't a presidential election year. The midterms see lower turnout. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think clearly Floridians want this. Also, clearly, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, does not want this. He fought tooth and nail against it. And in a midterm election year, with the governor's disapproval of the ballot measure, I wouldn't bet on my chances of it passing. At the same time, for any ballot measure to get 56, 57% support is a big accomplishment. And so clearly it is a popular issue. And personally, I don't know what to expect. But for the industry, in terms of the market, it creates a lot of new potential cannabis consumers in Florida, which has an aging population, millions and millions of people who have enough discretionary income to spend on cannabis. And so I think the industry really wants it to happen.
Do you know of other states? There's 34 states right now, or ish, that.
Yeah.
What about the states that don't have medical or legalization?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think that I'm trying to choose my words carefully here, because the states, by and large, that don't have medical or adult use recreational legalization are red states at this point. And I don't see cannabis legalization becoming a winning issue in heavily red states anywhere. They may get support, they may get close to 50% support, but ultimately the majority is going to vote against cannabis legalization. And getting legalization passed via ballot measures, I think, is probably not the pathway in a state like, I don't know, Texas, let's say.
What
right?
about a state like Pennsylvania?
Yeah. Look, I'm strictly being coy about Pennsylvania because, look, like, it's a purple state. Josh Shapiro, the governor, is very pro legalization. But it's also been extremely difficult for the legislature to come together and actually deliver a bill to his desk. I don't know enough about the nuances of Pennsylvania's legislature. I would put the handicap much higher on Pennsylvania than Oklahoma switching from medical to recreational, right?
Mhm.
But ultimately, like when it's a legislature passed bill versus a ballot measure, it becomes political and it's a football that gets negotiated against. And so the will has to be there for lawmakers. And I think Pennsylvania's will may be there, but I expected it to happen last year and it didn't. And I don't want to be held accountable to making a prediction that may not be true. I think another interesting state is Virginia. The incoming governor has said Virginia did pass legalization. It's effectively decriminalized. The incoming governor wants to regulate the industry. And it'll be interesting to see what regulations Virginia delivers to her desk because the previous, or I guess he's still the governor, but the current governor has vetoed twice now legislation to legalize cannabis in the state. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I think the last piece I'll say on this is that I do see, in terms of Texas, I don't ever see Texas putting cannabis on a ballot as a straight up and down vote. I don't really see the legislature deciding to regulate dispensaries, but what is happening now is the governor is directing the state to come up with regulations around cannabis beverages. And so I think the hemp ban is going to force states to come up with regulations for products that already exist and are already there. And so that model may be something that red states do. And they may never have dispensaries, but they may have cannabis beverages in gas stations or something like that. That's certainly a model that could happen.
It's like a silver lining.
It could be. I don't know. But look, like if you can go to Dallas, Texas or Houston, Texas and buy a THC beverage, I think that's a world that no one would have ever expected we'd be in 25 years ago, let's say.
Yeah, who would, if that happened and they're at the forefront of legalizing hemp to a certain degree, who would have thought?
Exactly. Who would have thought? And I think that's the thing about covering cannabis legalization is it looks like, I think it looks like this is a settled issue, right? Canada legalized cannabis and the sky certainly has not fallen in Canada. It's a vastly popular issue on both sides of the political spectrum, although support has declined for Republicans recently, but it really isn't. And legalizing cannabis is really complex. It's really nuanced and attitudes and ideas do change once cannabis is in people's communities. Some people like it, they see the sky hasn't fallen, and some people don't like it. And some of those reasons are good reasons, and some of those reasons are stuck in the 1980s. And I think it's a fascinating policy area to cover because it's always surprising, right? I think prior to the Farm Bill passing, no one ever expected there to be, like you said, THC beverages in Texas until there were. And now there are, and now it's effectively normal. And the governor's throwing his hands up and saying, if we can't beat them, join them. Let's regulate this. And so that's a fascinating process.
Is there any news or movement on rescheduling?
Again, I laugh because the last substantive news we got on rescheduling was in August when President Trump made an offhand remark saying he's going to make a decision in the next few weeks. It's now November 20th. A few weeks have certainly expired. I don't know. And I really wish I did know. I don't know. I think the political undercurrent that makes rescheduling good policy for Trump and the Republicans right now certainly exists. They're losing support among young people. Post the elections earlier this month, like it's looking like the midterms are going to be very tough for the Republicans. There's a lot of seats in play in the House and potentially in the Senate that they didn't think were going to be in play. And so doing something popular like rescheduling may help them. It could also be something that they run in the midterms on, saying, look, we're going to do this if we can keep our majority. Haven't really seen much of that. So the political underlying trend is certainly there. That being said, Trump is a Republican. I think he's 80 years old or 79 years old. I don't think this is his issue. And if it's not his issue, he's got his hands full with a lot of things. It's very complicated to do. I don't know. And I'm saying this, I just really don't know. The other piece I'll say on that, Sarah Carter, who is going to take the ONDCP office, which is basically the White House drug czar, she has a confirmation hearing coming up where these rescheduling questions will come up. And so we'll get a little bit more clarity, both about her thinking and the administration's thinking through those confirmation hearings. But I haven't seen anything to say, oh, it's coming around the corner. I think it's possible that we go through all of Trump's administration and we have no substantive movement on federal cannabis reform other than this hemp ban, and that's the wrong direction. But look, the president is Donald Trump. he could wake up tomorrow and say, let's do this. And so that's why when I say I don't know, I really don't know.
That's what I think too, because
Yeah,
although he is a Republican, he's more of a moderate in terms of his policies.
he is. And he wants young people. And I do think there's a world, and this is not based on my reporting, this is really my own thinking. There is a world where he says, I'm going to reschedule medical cannabis, not recreational. And I think he's probably hearing it from other seniors on the golf course in Florida, where like they use edibles for the joint pain, it helps them golf in the morning, etc. Like he is getting that input, but I think he's surrounded by people that look at cannabis as a drug, don't like drugs, think drugs are bad. So it'll be interesting to see. But I do think there's a world in which they rephrase rescheduling to be just for medical cannabis. That being said, I think my earlier point still stands that the politics for him are very favorable to move on this issue, and it's just a matter of doing so.
Yeah. What else is in the news?
That yeah, what else is in the news? I think that's about it, right? I think the rescheduling story, if it heats up, is going to be the biggest one. New York is always a fascinating market. The hemp ban, we're going to be unraveling the effects of this hemp ban, I think, for the next 360 days. What is it? 357 days now. So to me, those are the most pertinent issues. I would say some of the other issues that I think are interesting, and this is a little bit particular to New York, are product inversion. New York had a big scandal around product inversion, meaning basically out of state cannabis being laundered as in state cannabis and sold in dispensaries. So I think a lot of compliance issues are going to come up in New York as a result of the scandal. That'll be interesting to watch. In California, I would say some things that I thought were interesting. San Francisco, I think it was yesterday or possibly on Tuesday, San Francisco City Council decided to push out implementing a municipal tax on cannabis dispensaries. And so I think that was an interesting realization that maybe, this industry is wildly overtaxed, and all these policy goals that they wanted from cannabis legalization, tax revenue for education and roads, eroding the illicit market, consumer safety, all those things don't work when consumers are still buying from the illicit market. And so I think there was some sort of interesting realization there from municipal policymakers in San Francisco, as well as the California government, that like maybe this isn't working. And that's honestly, and I'm not saying this lightly, like that's the first time I've seen that from the state of California, because it really should be a leader in the industry. And it's absolutely not. And because it's just so heavily taxed, compliance is so difficult. And so I'm interested to see if I'm being wildly optimistic and things will change, or they're going to fall back into the same pattern.
California is, I feel like sometimes when I think about California, I feel as though I'm living in the upside down world. Does that make sense?
1,000%. Yeah, it makes sense. It's what happens. Like I'm a journalist. I'm not supposed to be political. Like I'm very progressive in my politics, right? But the story of California's cannabis industry, to me, as someone sitting on the opposite coast, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's what happens when progressive ideas meet a progressive economy, right? So you have a very progressive idea like legalization to create economic growth, for criminal justice reform, but then it meets California's taxes, California's compliance costs, and all the sort of local and state laws layered on top of each other that basically make doing business impossible. And so that to me is the story. And I hope there is some industry friendly reform. And I think what we saw out of San Francisco this week may be a positive step in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Before I let you go, Jeremy, actually, I should ask you, if you were knowing what you know, if you were to open up a cannabis business today, what state would you choose?
Oh God, that's a really good question. I'm going to take the terrible answer and say I probably wouldn't open a cannabis dispensary knowing
But
what
that's
I
not
know.
a terrible answer. That's probably
I
this
think
one.
there's a lot of other businesses that I might be better off operating in. That being said, I would open not Michigan, because Michigan is having a lot of price compression issues. I would look to open right on the border of a state that does not have legalization. So I would say, and this is, I don't know if this is a cop out answer, but maybe like Colorado on the Utah border or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So my addressable market becomes very big. And I know Colorado has its own challenges, every state does, but at least you can get those out of state customers. I think those are often the highest performing dispensaries. Maybe Missouri, I think would be another choice. But look, this is a very difficult industry to operate in. I certainly would not choose New York or California. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I say it all the time. I do not envy operators. They do such an amazing job. They're You have to be so persistent and so okay with uncertainty to be
Yes.
successful in this industry
Yeah.
that we just have to support them as much as possible.
I agree. Look, I totally agree. And operating any business is very difficult, but cannabis is super, super hard. It just contends with challenges that no other business I think I can think of in my head face. They compete with the illicit market. The product, there's a lot of substitution with what cannabis is, and so you can easily get the same product for cheaper on the illicit market. There's really heavy compliance costs, really heavy regulations. The laws are very difficult. There's a lack of capital. There's all these things that make this such a difficult business. And I think, to your point, you really have to be passionate to want to do this.
Yeah, I make it a point to always buy legal.
Me
Just
too.
do
Me too.
my
Even though
part.
it hurts my wallet a little bit, but I always buy legal, especially in New York.
Take it the state.
Yeah.
We have a segment called Rolling Out where I'll is rapid fire questions on cannabis.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah. Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay. Are you a daytime or a nighttime person?
Nighttime.
Flower, edible, or vape?
Edibles only because I'm in my 30s now and I'm getting a little worried about my health. I think my favorite consumption method is a big joint.
What's your favorite strain?
I like things that lean a little bit heady. Hybrids. I don't know if I have a favorite strain, but I think the OG, like Headband, Blue Dream that used to get in the late 2010s, like I haven't really been able to find stuff like that in the legal market yet, although maybe I'm not looking in the right places because most of my consumption has been edibles these days. But I would say, yeah, Headband, Blue Dream. I used to smoke a lot of sour diesel in college just because we had a grower who had that strain and it was awesome. But yeah, I like it to be a little bit headier more than like just a straight body high. That being said, like the purpley indicas, like any sort of like purpley indica that like tastes delicious is something I'll go for too.
New York or Toronto in terms of cannabis?
That's a hard question. Damn. I want to say I want to give the tip to Toronto for only because it was it moved way ahead of New York, right? Cannabis was legal in Toronto years ahead of New York. I think there's a lot of, especially pre-legalization, there's a lot of interesting growers, even in Ontario, but especially the cannabis we got from BC was really high quality. So I'm going to give the slight edge to Toronto. That being said, I think New York has a really interesting micro growing scene going on right now, and it's only getting better.
Yeah, and New York is just getting started.
It's just getting started, right? So maybe ask me in a year and I'll have a different answer.
What was your first experience with cannabis?
I was way too young. I didn't know it was going to be a career path, but I was 14 years old at a house party with my older brother and his friends who were 17, and they thought it was funny to get me high, and I did too.
Hopefully your parents are not listening.
They knew about it. They were not happy.
Your worst experience?
I don't have bad experiences. I love weed.
Your best memory?
Okay, I don't know if this is my best memory, but it's a good one. So I quit smoking weed for a little bit because of a prior job drug tested me. And then as soon as I passed the drug test, it was right when the first Mad Max movie came out. I don't know if you've seen it. It's really awesome. One of my favorite movies ever. And so I got really high with one of my friends. We went to the premiere in Brooklyn and it was like the first time I got high in a few months. And the movie absolutely blew my mind. It just sticks out of my head as just, that was the best night ever.
That reminds me, an opposite experience. Have you seen the movie Inception?
Oh, of course. Yeah, yeah, of course.
I'm sitting there for the first 20 minutes. I'm like, I am way too high for this. What is
Yeah,
going on?
what is going on? Yeah.
What the heck is going on? In 30 seconds, can you explain what is cultivated news?
Cultivated News is the daily cannabis industry briefing for professionals in the cannabis industry. We have a daily newsletter, daily live streams, and we try and surface the best reporting possible about the industry.
If our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, how can they?
Yeah, so first off, I'll do a plug. Subscribe to Cultivated. You'll enjoy giving it space in your inbox, www.cultivated.news. You can find me on Twitter, X, Jeremy Berke, and LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me.
Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks so much. This was a blast.
Thanks for listening to the KayaCast podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast in your favorite podcast app or visit our website to access